Do it one more time.
Hey, this is Jeff, and today we're going to build this watch. So we're going to build a custom watch today entirely from brand new parts. This watch is based on a Seiko SKX 007, like the one in my hands here. This one is one that I custom built prior, using all new parts from a bunch of different companies that make aftermarket modification parts for this SKX 007 model. We are going to need a few tools to be able to do this. We'll start with our crystal press. This is used to press in the sapphire crystal that we're putting in. We can also use it to press in a bezel, but we don't need to do that today. This is a case wrench, which can be used to open the back of most screw-down case backs on watches. Just as shown here, it just fits in those little notches in the back. These are hand setters. They're just small tools with nylon ends that we can use to set our hands into place on the dial. This small bulb here is just used for removing and blowing away dust or any other contaminants in it. We want to make sure we have a nice clean case with no dust or other dirt in it. We need some parts for the watch. Least importantly, of course, our strap, which goes on very last. But we have a number of other parts that are going to go on with it. This is our case. This was purchased as an assembly. Link to all of these parts is going to be down in the description below. This is a bronze case. It came with a crown, a case back, and a bezel already pre-installed. We're going to partially disassemble it, but because of the soft nature of bronze, we're going to leave the bezel on it and install the crystal from the front with the bezel already pressed on. We'll start by unpacking our Seiko Instruments NE15 movement. This is the same as a 6R15C, just not branded. This is a little bit of an upgrade movement from what's typically used in a Seiko mod build. This one has a little bit longer power reserve, about 50 hours of power reserve when fully wound, and is capable of achieving a little bit better accuracy and some better movement finishing. Normally we'd use a 4R35 or a 4R36 movement, which only has 41 hours of power reserve. Placed it in our movement holder here. Just make sure there's no dust. We're going to clean it off, and we're going to get to installing our dial. There's a couple small tabs on the back of our dial, and we need to clip 2 of them off. There's 4 total. 2 of them get clipped off. Really depends on how you're going to mount the movement. If you have a crown at 4 o'clock, you clip off 2 of them. If you have a crown at 3 o'clock, you clip off the other 2. This just makes sure the dial stays aligned in the case. In this case, we have a 4 o'clock crown, so we're going to snip off the appropriate stems and place it onto our movement. We're just going to push it down onto the movement here and make sure it's firmly in place before we move on to the next step. Again, a link to all of these components is going to be in the description below. About to install our hands here, holding them very carefully with a pair of tweezers and cleaning them off with a microfiber cloth just to make sure there's no fingerprints or other dust or contaminants on it. Now this is the hardest part of the whole build, is placing the hands on. The hour and minute hands are relatively easy. We just want to make sure that they're lined up at 12 o'clock. Before we started this, I did make sure that our date wheel was just changed over at midnight. Not important since this is going to be a no date watch, but I like to do it just for the sake of accuracy. So now we have our hour hand in place, and we just pressed our minute hand on. Clean off the minute hand. All right, there we go. Nice and shiny. Now we're going to move the minute hand down to 6 o'clock here. This makes it just a little bit easier to get lined up to have our second hand in place. Now this second hand needs to be placed exactly at 12 o'clock. We want to make sure all the hands align very well and work with each other and don't interfere or anything like that. The second hand is the hardest part. I'm showing a whole bunch of attempts here, and there was even more off camera that you didn't see. This was not an easy task, and it requires some very, very steady hands that few people, including myself, do not have. But I tried my best, and I eventually got it on. With our movement, dial, and hands assembled, it's time to set them aside and install the crystal in our case. I'm going to quickly place our chapter ring. It's just a plain chapter ring down in the case, and then we can grab our gasket and put it in. Gaskets are pretty cheap, and I recommend having more than one on hand in case this step does not go well. You may squeeze it just the wrong way, pinch it, and then you wouldn't be able to guarantee water resistance. In order for this to work with a press, I do need to put the back of the case back on. Just hand tight is fine. Let's unpack our crystal, and it is important to leave the crystal wrapped up from the factory before you install it. We want to make sure we have zero dust because it's very hard to clean off on the inside once it's installed. We have it loosely placed there, and we're going to push down with our press. Now, you do need to use firm and consistent pressure, and you'll notice that I rotate the case around and press down a few different times. This makes sure that we have it seated nice and evenly in our case, so it becomes water resistant and is firmly in place. Alright, it's time to install the movement in the case, and first we need to remove the temporary stem that comes with it. With the stem pushed in all the way, just push down on that little tab that I highlighted with the arrow and you'll be able to pull it right out by hand. And now we can place it in our movement just as you see here. It just drops in, and you want to make sure you have it lined up and that 12 o'clock is at the top of the watch. I'm going to use the stem in my existing watch for reference, so I'm going to pull that one out because we do need to trim our stem to size. Alright, you'll see our stem from our watch there to take a look at, and I'm going to match that up with the crown and a brand new stem. Just using a pair of snips, we're going to cut it to size to make sure it's not too long, otherwise we will never be able to screw the crown down into the case. So let's put it in at full length and compare it to the other one. We'll get our measurement as to how much we're going to clip off, remove it, and then snip the end off, just like that. It's really thin and small. You can use a pair of flush cutters to do this. You don't need any special pliers or anything like that. Just make sure you get a good, clean break. If you need to, you can file the end a little bit when you're done. I didn't need to in this case. It threaded right in. Length looks good. I'm alright with that. And when it's time to permanently install the stem, we just dip the end of it in a little bit of CA glue. I've also used E6000, whatever you want to use. The CA glue is nice because I can definitely guarantee it gets in the threads there. We screw it in, and that's it. These are very fine threads. You can't even really see them. So just make sure you get it in there nice and tight and that you have it glued in. I did give a minute to set before I installed it into the case. All right, so we have our case back gasket here. I've just oiled it with a little bit of synthetic watch oil and placed it down in the back of our case. Then we can place our case back on and tighten it a little bit by hand, and then use our case wrench to really secure it down. Now, you don't need to go super tight on this. If you crank it down, you may actually deform the gasket and it will no longer be waterproof. Let's go ahead and clean up our watch. I'm pretty happy with that. Still a couple steps left to go here. This is a small 3M adhesive ring, which we're going to use to install our bezel insert. This is a ceramic bezel insert, so be sure to be very, very careful with it. I'm using a very fine pair of tweezers here to make sure that our adhesive is nice and flat. I've also used contact cement for this, or E6000, something similar. And we want to make sure our bezel is clicked into place and install it at 12 o'clock. 12 o'clock. What is 12 o'clock? 12 o'clock. And place it down. Applied some nice even firm pressure to make sure the adhesive is stuck. And we also want to make sure that our bezel can rotate freely. There is a gasket that is lubricated there that I did not install. Again, it was pre-installed from the company I purchased this case set from, and because it's bronze and relatively soft, we left it alone. Just popping our spring bars in here. These are kind of the heavier, fatter 22mm spring bars, which is what I like on a dive watch. And this is a really nice, very soft strap. I was very, very happy with this one. So it just slides in. We'll take off our other watch there. By the way, if you want to see more watch content and talk about some of the watches I own, please let me know down below. I'm happy to do more watch videos. Kind of fun. I really enjoy it as a hobby. I'm pretty happy with how this looks. but there is still a little bit more to do. Let's make sure our watch is fully wound, and we're going to place it on a time grapher. Now, this is a tool you definitely don't need. This is a little overkill, but I will place a link to one down in the description below. It is an affiliate link, so if you click on it, it is going to help me out. So I appreciate that. This is a tool used to measure the accuracy of a watch, and we can use it to get our watch dialed in. This is my regular daily wear watch. This is a Seiko SBGR053. It is regulated to +6 or -3 seconds a day, measured in 6 positions at 3 temperatures, which goes above and beyond the Swiss chronometer standards. Something I really, really like about what Seiko does in their higher end watches. So we'll put this on and get a good reading off of it. And we can see we're starting off at about +12 seconds a day, which is pretty good, but I think we can get it a little bit better. This is hard to see, but there's a small lever right there on our balance wheel that adjusts the length of our hairspring. Now, full end to end, this adjustment, which is just about 4 or 5 millimeters total, can regulate a watch to like plus or minus 10 minutes. I'm not totally certain on that number, but there's a lot of room for movement there, so the adjustments we need to make are very, very tiny. Notice that we're at +4 or 3 seconds a day here. We've just moved this a hair. The amount that lever has moved is so minimal you can't really even see without at least a magnifying glass, maybe even a microscope. So we're going to test it briefly in a few different positions. I will say that off camera I did come back and regulate it a little bit more. While this was very, very close, I actually wanted to make it advance the timing a little bit more. It's always better to have a watch that runs fast than a watch that runs slow. That way, if it's running a little bit fast, you just pull the crown out to stop the time for a few seconds and then push it back in when you're right on track. Much easier to set a watch just by pulling out the crown, letting it catch up, and then pushing it back in than it is to have to reset the watch every time. Just do some final cleaning and put our case back on, and we are good to go. I do want to come back quick and show you how to put a bezel on a watch. It's a little bit tricky. You do have to do it with a press. So just take a look here quick, and I'll show you how we did that on our other watch. We just use a small steel spudger tool with some packing tape wrapped around it at the end of it to make sure it doesn't mar our watch. The bezel just pops off, and so does the click spring. Also in the bezel, you don't see it, but there is a small rubber gasket. And we'll just use our crystal press, place them back on in the order we took them off, well, the reverse order rather, and then press it on, make sure it turns around nicely, and there we go. Thank you so much for watching. I really, really appreciate it. And if you want to see more content about watches and timekeeping, it's something that I'm really interested in and I've taken on as a bit of a hobby and interest and a collection. I'd love to be able to share that with you. So if you want to see more, shoot me a message, leave a comment down below, thumb up the video. I'd really appreciate it. Thanks so much and have a great day.